And he's got a great website at Stanford if you want to visit. I think we also had a cash infusion of COVID relief, ESSER, and I'm not really clear on it, but how that plays into the budget, or if it does. But I just wanted to caution against building that into the budget, especially if we plan to increase the budget based on a 3% guideline, because that money's not going to be available. In other words, we don't want to build that into our baseline. Now, I'm not sure if that's been discussed or not. The rest of the stuff I had was a few comments, questions about DEI, but it can wait if I'm out of time.
Okay, thank you.
So if you want to send that to the chairman, you could, your data, you could pass that out.
All right.
People at home are not having an easy time hearing. I don't know if they can hear now. I've unmuted my computer. The owl doesn't seem to be picking
This says it's picking up the sound, but
things up. So if somebody at home can let me know if they're hearing anything now.
we had to do a test speaker. Zoom.
Okay, they can.
Now we're on. Right in the room to.
Okay. So now I've muted myself, but hopefully the owl's working. Is that the way we should be doing it?
Yep, as long as I get confirmation from someone remotely that we're good.
Okay, can you hear us now? Right now,
All right, we can hear, as it was Sharon.
6:36. Okay, well, we'll move on. I don't have any correspondence. School committee meeting minutes of February 7th.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to accept the school committee meeting minutes of February 27th, 2022.
February 7th.
Is that what I said?
Yeah, I think you said
I mean,
27th.
February 7th, 2022.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any comments, edits? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes of February 8th.
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the minutes of February 8th, 2022.
I'll second.
Any comments or edits? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
I just do want to point out that the meeting is, we may very well at some point have Veronica joining us. At which point we'll switch to roll call votes. I don't believe she's here yet. Just gonna check and make sure. It's not. Appear to be here. Cool. Okay. Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off by sharing some highlights and commendations for some of our folks around the school district. One of the highlights that particularly stood out to me since we last met was some of the school spirit related events that took place on the Friday before the February break. In the morning, more students visited elementary just to be entertained by the students from the middle and high schools, chorus and jazz ensembles, and they were really excited. One little guy on the way out said, "This was the best concert ever." So the enthusiasm was really high, and kids were really excited. So again, I want to just give a big thanks to the students who took time out of their day to perform for the younger ones, for Mr. Cade, and also for the principals for helping to coordinate the logistics of this mini field trip. But I thought it was a great way for us to come together in a show of unity, I think, in the K-12. And I think that was really important. And I think it was great for the kids to see what they can do when they go to the high school or the middle school in terms of the arts. In fact, I did hear kids talking with one another and with the teachers and saying, "Oh, with these issues that we get to play, I get to play, that one over there." And so that was really exciting that they had a chance to kind of preview that and start thinking about that too. It's really important to us, I think, as anyone who's spent any time around the district sees, what makes the district work is all these students who play sports, but also engage in the arts and also engage in advanced courses at school and also volunteer. And so we want to make sure that we're helping to grow that spirit while the kids are at the elementary level before they even filter up to secondary school level, so that they're already starting to wrap their mind around what it means to be a Lenox student. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, that was a great event, Mark. I heard a lot of great feedback from people about it. And also it was pointed out to me by somebody that for many of those students, it was the first time they've ever set foot in that building because we've been shut down for so many activities over COVID. It was really, ooh, finally got to go in, you know.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear the positive feedback, but after I saw the performance, I thought this would be really great to share with the elementary kids. So
Yeah, really good.
I'm glad we were able to pull it off, and everyone was super flexible making it go. So we appreciate that. And then to cap off the day, the students from Morris were treated to an all-school assembly on Friday afternoon that included a sing-along, games, prizes, and even Principal Kelly, who's in the audience, participating in the scooter race. I won't say whether she won or not, but she participated nonetheless.
There's a rematch coming.
All right, I'll be there to check it out. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great way to cap off the week before the break and send kids out on a high note. And I think also allow kids, I think to your point, to feel that school is getting back to quote unquote normal or something that approximates a new normal. But it was really exciting to see that and to hear, how excited the students were as they were leaving the building. It was literally buzzing during dismissal and parent pickup. So we're really excited for that. Quick update on postseason athletics. The Alpine State ski meet will be held tomorrow at Wachusett Mountain, and we have a number of students who qualified from Lenox. Max, Madison, DiGrigoli, Noah and Oliver Kirby, Molly Knight, Ella Hall, Michael, and Rocco Bray. So good luck to them tomorrow at the state downhill ski meet. We are really excited that we had so many folks qualify. Also, our boys basketball team is the 14th seeded team in the Division 5 MIAA tournament. They are by in the first round. Well, I guess they call it preliminary round, and then now they're in the first round, which is round of 32. And that will be Thursday night at 6:30 here at Lenox. We get to host to a higher seed against Springfield Renaissance. So we're looking forward to that. And then the winner will move on to play either Drury or the winner of the other two games that other two teams that are playing into that round as well. So it'll be a great night to come on out and cheer on the Millionaires on Thursday night at 6:30. Also this week, we have an early dismissal on the 1st. So we have the teachers at Morris meeting in the library to discuss the transition to Power School, specifically with a focus on how that will impact the Morris report card and putting it together and printing that. Power School implementation continues to move along. Randy McLeod, our technology director, has done a great job of working with the team of stakeholders around the district to continue to work on that project. As of right now, all of the students are uploaded for next school year. All of our courses are loaded for next school year, and they're going to schedule next school year in the new program, which we're really happy to hear about, rather than having to do it in the old program and go back and forth between the two. So that continues to move forward. Special education staff at Morris will be working on their MCAS portfolios, and we also have special opportunity for our professional, our PD for our paraprofessionals, with Dave Wary, school psychologist, who'll be working with those folks regarding the social emotional learning and working with students that they serve. And then at Elementary Jess, Amy Higgins, the school adjustment counselor, will be working with the staff there, helping to facilitate and strengthen their ability to incorporate SEL strategies to meet the needs of students during this challenging times in return to school from some severe disruptions surrounding COVID the last couple of years. So obviously, you can see the focus is going to be on SEL. That was one of the things we talked about early on in the school year, and continue to make sure we thread that through overall. Tomorrow is National Read Across America Day. And that's a really big day for elementary students. And so Morris will be welcoming guest readers to come and join their classrooms and read to the students. So we have a variety of guest readers coming to visit tomorrow. We have the National Honor Society from MHS coming over. So again, we're really excited to have that cross collaboration between buildings. We're really thankful that they're going to come over and volunteer some time to read to the elementary students. Also, some of the members of our central office administration team, as well as others, will be serving as guest readers tomorrow. So we're really excited about that. I have to go home and pick out a book, thinking all day about which one would be a good fit. So I'm looking forward to going and reading tomorrow to read aloud. It's one of my very favorite things. So I'm excited personally. The next thing I'd like to share for the board's consideration is a draft revision of our COVID-19 mitigation policy. This policy would update our earlier policy with some of the newest guidance from both DESE and the CDC. So I'm going to share my screen just so that folks at home can also see the document. I think that'll make this the most meaningful. So just give me a second while I pull that up. And so the mitigation policy applies to the entire Lenox Public School community. And this is a policy that was developed beginning with our administration team after our last meeting where we were asked to go back and kind of work on some language on what we thought would be the best way to move forward with a potential mask optional environment. And then also, after developing these recommendations, this was then brought to the JLMC, and both the administration team and JLMC unanimously offered their support. Tri-Town Board of Health also was effusive in their praise, particularly looking at some of our benchmarks and phase implementation. They thought that it quite serves as a model for the region. So it says that we're committed to providing a safe school environment during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic for all students and staff. To allow schools to remain safely open for learning, the following actions will be taken to monitor COVID-19 within our school community and mitigate its spread. All LPS employees and students may opt to wear a mask to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, regardless of vaccination status, effective March 14th, 2022. If newly reported cases in each building are lower than 2% of the building population, that will be calculated as the number of new cases divided by the school community times 100 for the preceding week. So far, all indications are that we're heading into that in a very strong position. We had very few reported cases, 4 reported overall, 3 students and 1 staff member at MHS, and no students or staff at Morris. All LPS employees are required to submit COVID-19 vaccination status to the district no later than October 12, 2021. So that's already in effect. We figured that it made sense to keep that in effect, then also make sure that it was spread to any new employees that were hired, that they would have to immediately supply their vaccination status upon their first day of work. All employees will be required to participate in the weekly routine COVID safety check program. There are no exemptions from reporting your vaccination status or participating in the routine COVID safety check program if you're an employee of the district. Any employee must quarantine due to a positive COVID-19 test, but is well enough to work, may continue to do so remotely without using any of these benefits. Employees must be able to participate in those remote meetings if they're required. So they would need a stable connection of the internet or a telephone. Masks will be required in all school health offices. Again, this is a federal mandate that has not been changed yet. We'll be watching CDC to see if there's any change to that. Breaking yesterday, the CDC has issued new guidance to clarify the rules up for school buses. And so the following statement has been stricken that would require masks on buses. buses are still, or sorry, masks are still required in public transportation, but the CDC has said that school buses are a unique situation in public transportation where they would not require masks to be worn by participants. Whenever new case percentages exceed 2% of the school community for 2 consecutive weeks, the JLMC will convene within 48 hours to deliberate what, if any, mitigation measures should be enacted until this threshold is no longer exceeded. And then, of course, this policy will supersede any previous policies and take effect as soon as it's adopted by the school committee. So this is the recommendation from the administration team and the JLMC in terms of moving forward to coexist in a COVID environment, allow schools to remain open. Any questions, suggestions, revisions that we should make?
Are we eliminating that 7th bullet point with the school buses, or is there a need to make an amendment to that?
So again, I struck that today based on the language, but my impression is that that would not be present in the final version since it's no longer applicable. And the CDC guidance should be followed.
So we can cross this off before we vote.
Mark, just a question I had. With regard to if the JLMC has to convene to review, is the thinking that the JLMC can then implement a new policy itself, or it would recommend something back to the school committee?
So again, that's up to the board's, or the school committee's discretion. However, my personal preference, again, this is just me speaking my own mind, would be it would be, I think, helpful if the JLMC was trusted to make those decisions. I know that there are other districts around the country where that's been the case, and so they've been able to respond a little bit more quickly without having to constantly go through and offer new policies. But again, that's totally up to the discretion of the school committee in terms of what you all think makes the most sense.
And that administrative latitude is what we had in the early days of the pandemic, and it worked very effectively. Everybody's, all the stakeholders are at the table, and decisions could be made around fast changing needs.
Yeah, that's why I feel confident about that. For those who don't know, the JLMC is the Joint Labor Management Committee. It's comprised of representatives from the administration. So that's myself and Kim Dion from our special education staff. Also, members of the teaching union and paraprofessional ranks, as well as representative from the school committee as well, Megan Kirby. So we do feel that there is wide representation, equal representation all the way around those 3 and 3 administration / school committee and employees. And so I know personally, I would love if we just had the flexibility to be able to make those decisions. And we again wanted to not have a hard and fast rule that when we reach this, we will definitely do X. So when we reach X amount of cases, we're going to definitely be masked, but rather than say, let's talk about it and deliberate what we should do, if anything. And sometimes, we can also look at that and say, okay, we have exceeded the 2%, but it was one family that had this outbreak, and so therefore, we have this other knowledge to make an informed decision around. So that was kind of the thinking there, but again, we're flexible about it.
Yeah, no, that's fine with me, I think, and we can all agree, we just understand what it means. I think because this will be the written official committee passed policy, I don't know if JLMC could then essentially override it. So if the group thinks it's clear, that's fine. But that was just a question in my mind. And then the one other thing I would just raise, again, doesn't have to be new language in the policy. I think something important that CDC did was to basically say that these assessments should be made on the basis of both case counts and hospital health system capacity, not just case count. And so I realize for our purposes, we don't have our finger on the pulse of BMC day to day. But I would strongly encourage JLMC and then the administration, if this were to be triggered for some reason, to consider both of those factors rather than snapping back solely on the basis of case count.
Yeah, thank you for that. And obviously, we will be looking at multiple data sources. That's how the JMC has operated. And also inviting in experts from our public health offices to guidance in that. One of the things that, I spent a lot of time talking back and forth with Tri-Town around metrics and what makes sense. And the difficulty with using, one or the other, or, count across, the community or the county, is that not all of the samples that you'd be capturing are representative of the school population you're studying. So, Jim Willis was really in favor of not tying ourselves to something like that, where we're looking at maybe cases of an elderly unvaccinated community in, rural Berkshire County, they're making decisions, in Lenox. It didn't make a lot of sense. So, but I think obviously the CDC has said, that capacity is one of the things we should be looking at. So we would definitely take that under consideration in looking at data points. But we also wanted to set a rigorous threshold, but also one that was realistic, and felt that coming in at a 98% confidence interval would be something that would be reasonable for families to have, a high degree of assurance that schools are safe and that very low numbers of cases that we would tolerate in schools before taking actions, based around that. So that was something that was, I think, widely popular with the folks that had the early ones policy.
What would 2%, a 2% number look like at Morris or school terms?
6 and 8. 6 at Morris and 8.
Yeah.
6 and 8.
And that's why it's important to note that, if it was, for example, the Catholic Ruby household of 6 children right there. So if we could just give ourselves the ability to look at each case by case.
Right. And that's where we felt that flexibility, is important, but also to also know that with those numbers, they sound low, 6 and 8, but there's been very few times outside of those spikes around returning to breaks that they see that. So we also felt that while those were high thresholds, there were ones that we've seen that we've generally stayed with under for the majority of the school year.
Mark, I have a question.
Yeah.
About your metrics. In the first bullet point, you talk about 2% of the building population. In the last bullet point, it's 2% of the school community. Is that an intentional?
Not necessarily that those should be considered interchangeable. So in both cases, we need students and staff in the school.
Well,
In the first bullet point, it makes it sound like it's building by building.
Yeah.
The second, it's
You think it's something connected with the second one?
It does.
So, and again, I guess when we wrote this up, we're thinking like the school community, and the community for each school separately, not the district community, but if we want to revise that, to match the earlier language. we can do that.
Which language would be the one we want to use, the first language?
I think the building population language makes more sense.
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
so it would be 2% of,
You have an amendment you want to put?
Just
You have an amendment you want to put?
Well, we have,
Oh,
it's not,
I don't know.
we haven't introduced it.
Yeah,
yet.
we haven't
Yeah.
introduced it yet.
so we can, make some adjustments.
It would be 2% of a building population instead of the school community.
so made that change.
Okay. So you made the change down below.
Yes.
And the other comment or discussion, I didn't see anything about sports, I don't believe.
All right, excellent question. And so at the time that this conversation began, MIAA was still requiring masks. And so that was initially in here as a bullet point. It did get removed during development because the MIAA has now waived that. And they are now looking at following whatever the rules are of the host site. So until the 14th, any gameplay here, so like the basketball game Thursday night, would have to still follow our masking guidelines. And so that's how the MIAA tries to move forward. So once this takes effect, then no mask would be required at sports and Lenox after the 14th.
But there might be some other school.
Right. Right.
I wonder if we shouldn't explicitly state just that, for sports, we follow the NIA guidance. That's it.
Well, Mark's ending.
It's a fast type of.
Not really.
No pressure.
Only if we don't distract.
No pressure. Thanks for people looking at your shoulder. Nice and tight.
So when we're done with questions, if somebody wants to make a motion to accept the policy, and I think because of the timeliness of this, I think we're gonna wait a second reading. I think we'll just go with one reading.
Last question coming from me, my understanding is that Morris moved back to regular cafeteria seating today, but that kids were required to sit alternate spacing seats and not directly across from each other. That whole concerns me as a matter of policy. That doesn't strike me as either consistent with what we had discussed or supported by the public health guidance. But I also take it as just again an illustration of my broader concern that we're still in an environment where we don't have consistent policy and messaging. And I'm fully on board with the focus on social emotional learning and helping kids understand what's going on and get back to whatever version of normal we will have going forward. And I think it's incredibly important that we have very clear and consistent messaging that we are confident these things are safe, we are moving back in these phases. And so I know the committee wasn't comfortable with my policy proposal from last time that we state explicitly there will be no what I would call freelancing. But I just want to take the opportunity again, assuming they're not putting it in, to underscore that it's really important to have a message, I think, from you down, Mark, that these are the things we're doing and we're not doing things that aren't this, at least not without running up through the formal channels.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I shared it with the committee, and if I didn't, I can certainly share it, but we did develop in the admin team also a plan that included messaging plan for parents, that community listening sessions, also in messages also that are going out, and also talk about when and how we go back to seating in cafeterias. Both principals are in favor of doing that, so this is not something that I don't think anyone's going rogue and not following the policy, but I think that wanted to wait until the policy was passed to start implementing these new measures. And we're ready to move forward and get that message out there and be consistent and clear.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did change the policy as of today. We put the kids back in the cafeteria, but then told them they couldn't sit next to each other. I don't know, I mean, I know Brett, obviously, you told this also, I don't mean to exclude you from the discussion. Can the kids sit next to each other tomorrow? I'm not aware of any.
It would be helpful to understand what was coming, what you guys come up with as far as a plan, because I think we're all in the dark about that.
Okay, so yeah, I can share that. I just don't want to try to pull that right now to share my screen.
No, that's okay.
So, but we do have a whole plan to roll this out so that it is clear, it is consistent.
And how long of a process does that look like?
I mean, not long at all. It coincides with that end date of the 14th. We didn't want to make sure we had time to adequately message it often so that there was no ambiguity or misunderstandings around the direction we're heading. So as long as this plan is approved by.
Can I just ask the how you came to that decision to kind of wait? Last we had talked the JLMC meeting, we had staff on board too that seating in Morris will go back to normal. And so I'm just curious, what led to that decision to wait?
I mean, there's nothing in particular that led to the decision to wait, other than the fact that we just wanted to make sure that we have the full support, and we have the policy passed as written, with no other curveballs that we have expected coming our way like that. It didn't seem like there's gonna be any, but we want to make sure that that was all in place before we went to implement the policy. We felt that we should have a policy. So that was really the only kind of reason why this morning we went that way. But again, both principals, when we met as the admin team, really wanted to get back to normal cafeteria sets as soon as possible. So it's not something that anyone is in any rush to try to delay or put off.
Any other questions? We'll make a motion to approve the policy. As written up there, rather than.
Well, I'll make a motion that we accept policy EBCFB, it looks like,
Yeah, the revised policy.
revised policy of COVID-19 mitigation policy for the Lenox Public School community.
Second that?
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Well,
All right, the next issue I'd like to raise for the school committee's consideration is the potential of increasing our tuition costs for our pre-K program, which currently is $3,200 per year, by 5% annually to reflect the traditional incremental costs and staffing. So typically for our teachers to move on step and get their year-over-year raises, those two numbers usually combine to about 5%. So rather than having to reset the cost every year, we thought that it would make sense to try to tether that to our actual realized increase in cost, so that the program continues to stay solvent and we continue to operate without being distorted as cost change versus the revenues that we collect.
and just to be clear on this, for anybody listening, students who've been identified with special needs pay nothing. This is for the other students who make up the cohort in each preschool class. So,
Do we provide financial aid to? Is there any need-based aid?
Yes. If you qualify for lunch, you have to.
But there's no sliding scale.
Is that a reimbursement for special needs students, or is it something that is a part of our budget? The reimbursement,
we absorb the cost.
we absorb the cost.
Yeah.
We have a grant, a small grant, 262 grant for a preschool program.
And does that cover all of the costs?
Now the grant is very small, so.
Yes, 8,100 and some change. We do utilize the tuition to offset some of the salary costs as much as we can.
So some years that 5% would be significant, and other years.
Well,
Sort of subsidizing the.
Yeah, I don't think that we could ever raise enough money via this to pay, the grant that Mr. Yon was talking about. Is this money, and then we supplement it with, we pay, most of it comes out of the operating budget.
So we just thought it was wise to either match it to whatever the cost is in the budget every year, or we thought even 5% was a more true reflection of the actual cost being incurred personnel.
And do we know how our tuition compares vis-a-vis other providers in the community?
So I don't know about other providers in the community. We did check in with other districts, and we're quite a bit lower than some of our neighbors. There are a few that don't charge anything, but they're the rarity. So it kind of runs the gamut. Melissa, I know you talked about trying to take a straw poll. Now, I don't know if you get around to it or not.
I did receive 6 responses, or 5 responses, and 2 charge and 3 do not. The 2 that do charge, one would have been at 25.65 this year. They're looking at raising it for next year, but they did waive it because of the pandemic this year.
Is it other school districts?
Those are other school districts, and there is one that is quite a bit higher than ours, at 5,000 for a full year, 5 days a week. We're at the 3,200.
I just know as a parent who had paid for daycare services, $3,200 a year was a steal. It's still we're paying the equivalent of a public school college tuition per child for daycare services. So
And one of the area programs around here, I believe it's about $900 a month. For 5 days a week.
So we're attractive to Lenox residents.
Yes.
This 5% increase would be $160 on the year, which is just under $1 a day. 92 cents, yeah. Generally to 170.
Mark, thinking about the right percentage, 5% might be an estimate of in many years, what we're seeing in increased staff costs, but thinking about the long run and also thinking about all the non-staff costs of the program, if our target, broadly speaking, is a 3% rise in cost year over year, would it make more sense? It seems to me it would make more sense to raise it at 3% a year.
So-
why do 5?
and we had some deliberation around that, because I thought the same thing, that made more sense to me on a logical level, but that would only capture part of the cost when you're missing part of the personnel cost. So typically, we're seeing a cost for folks to get their second column raises plus the incremental raise that generally is somewhere between that 2-3%. So that if we just did 3%, we would probably be not fully capturing what the increased personnel costs would be to us.
Right, but in the long run, you have teachers moving up the scale, and then in the long run, they tend to be replaced with teachers further down. I mean, we wouldn't want to, in those years, then suddenly cut pay a bunch, or cut tuition a bunch. So it seems like the straight line 3% would at times leave us under, and then if you had less experienced teachers, at other times leave us over, but that would better reflect the trajectory we want the district to be on.
Yeah, the actual percentage, I think, is definitely flexible. We were looking again to just try to tie it to some figures, so we had kind of a built-in raise that, as our costs increased, we were triggering those increases in our tuition as well, so to reflect that, rather than coming in the year and trying to haggle it out with the right prices.
Well, if we're kind of locking in an automatic escalator, I would certainly argue that we locked in 3%, and then if there are times we say this needs to be revisited, we need to go higher, that's the point. It feels like we should have a conversation about it.
What about a range of percentages to give the superintendent some discretion, so it's not coming back for discussion?
I would recommend tying it to the percentage increase in the budget each year. Sometimes it may be 3%, but sometimes it may be over.
Or less.
At what time do you need to actually let prospective preschool parents know that?
So again, I think, as a parent, I think the earlier the better, especially when you're shopping around for options. But I think that, again, by tying it to our budget, that as soon as we set our budget rate, then we could set that tuition rate immediately thereafter, so it gives families a maximum amount of time. Do that. I mean, again, historically, we always kind of set it around this time of year, so those two things kind of always linked up anyway in some ways. So I don't think that we're going to be behind letting families know if we were to change when we decide what the rates are.
So if we went with what Ms. Volkowski's suggesting on, well, with the percent increase, if the budget's going up from the year, if we made this decision on the same day that we approve we have our budget hearing, and we approve the budget, it's gonna go forward. I mean, obviously, it doesn't get approved by the town until the first Thursday in May, but if we wait until then to make the decision, we could say, all right, as long as that's not holding up decisions that have to be made by parents. you know.
Well, so we have, typically, we hold our preschool screenings in March, and we require a deposit, usually around April,
$200.
a $200 deposit, and we usually put the rate of, and we could obviously make changes as to, you know, what the rate will be determined, or it'll be, you know, we can reword it, but typically our pamphlet indicates what the tuition rate is, and that, like right now, it's posted on the website, and packets have gone out already. My plan was to contact those prospective parents that were interested to let them know that there would be an increase.
Yeah, I really do think we should keep it simple. I mean, not to dive too far into the modeling, but if you were to actually say that the tuition is dependent on the budget increase, then as the tuition changes, that's going to change your budget increase, and you're creating a loop. I also think that just good practice would both be to have, I mean, we shouldn't say, well, costs are going up faster than we want it, like it kind of puts the cart before the horse. So I think having a standard threshold makes a ton of sense. I think we should set the target threshold that aligns with our commitment to overall fiscal responsibility. And then if at some point in time that is departing from what we think makes sense with the overall budget. I mean, I think there are times when we want to have a broader discussion about it. For instance, I think we should probably offer a sliding scale above the free lunch potentially. There are all sorts of decisions we might want to make, but as a basic, here's the baseline. I think the 3% baseline would be the best and easiest sort of decision for budgeting purposes, for communication to parents. And for holding us accountable, so that if it is going higher than that, we'll see it and actually have to talk about it.
Well,
Is this presented for a vote, or is this just informational?
Well, I mean, typically the school committee has to set the rate, right? And so we would need, you know, some kind of vote from the committee. Again, we're just trying to look to a way to tie it to that percent increase, so that makes the overall communication that much simpler and straightforward. It also helps us make sure that we're staying current with our fiscal realities as well.
yeah, so we will want a motion to approve it, whether it's tonight or
Yeah.
or in 2 weeks. Somebody wishes to make a motion, we can do that now, or if somebody wishes to. Yeah,
How many pre-K children do we have currently? 34?
Two sections.
25. Okay, so it's
About
a
half,
minimum.
about half are typical peers who would be obligated to pay tuition, and about 25% of that have their tuition waived. So that leaves about 7 people maybe that are actually paying tuition. So we're looking at 3%, we'll be getting an extra $700. 3% increase would be just less than $100. Divided by 4. For additional for 7 students.
Can I suggest that just as part of voting on the budget, in 2 weeks you bring, because I think if we are gonna make it a standard annual thing, we'll have to be, it'll be a policy. So can you guys just bring us a policy to vote on when we go on the budget?
Sure. Okay, so we'll defer this till March 14th.
Just in closing, I'll say, I actually support that you're thinking about this, but this is something it's been on my mind for years. I think I brought it up a few years ago, and we did increase the tuition a bit, but it hadn't been looked at in a long time. But this is at least, I mean, we may want to think about the percentage increase, but I think this is actually a pretty sensible way to actually model it out. So thank you for.
Well, thank you, because I'm trying to really do that with all of our tuitions and charges that, want to pass along our increase to whatever it is we're charging. So if we're taking students in on, for all the programs that carry tuition, that we're being true to those costs as well. Don't want to be subsidizing those things for others than having to put the bill. So we're trying to, again, just kind of clean up our overall practice to try to be effective of our changing financial picture as well.
Now, given that March 10th is a preschool question and answer session, and March 22nd is sign up, I'm a little worried about delaying this too long so people don't have answers. So that's going to cost them some of the kids in. There's a small number of children that seem to be impacted by this. So I think I'd like to make a motion that we go with a 5% increase. The escalator, and 5% you will need to cover the costs.
So are you making a motion?
I am making the motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Right, and then the last item on superintendent's report tonight is an update on our budget development. So we have a presentation that we'll share. So again, I'll share my screen. Second one, So we wanted to have some time before the deliberations tonight to share latest information and updates with where we are with developing the budget for the following school year. So the question I think on everyone's mind is what's the latest? So thought we could look at the numbers. And we've been able to go through and as the numbers become more clear, to get a more sober look, I think, at where the numbers are coming in, and we're able to come in at a slightly lower budget figure than our initial one of 5.46% increase over the current year. And so this table here demonstrates the differences between these areas, the total budget. We'll see that there's a slight reduction in the overall budget. Special education revenues are applied, remain the same. The net budget comes down $100,000. Benefits stays the same. The total budget request again comes down just a hair under $100,000. Overall request of $78,702. So the increase initially proposed would have been $775,568. That number is now down to $6,867. And the percent increase changes from 5.46 to 4.91. So the overall reduction, looking at just a shade under $80,000 from the preliminary budget, or a decrease of about half a point. And so we'll take a look at where those savings are coming from. So in our original budget, for under LMHS, we had $12,500 for textbooks. That's down to $10,500. Field trips came down $2,000. The other activities in the LMHS budget came down $10,000. Athletic dues came down significantly. Again, some of these numbers are very rough estimates when we first set it all out. Then as we get more accurate figures, those change. That's definitely happened with the athletic dues. Math hardware, those are the iPads that are being requested, are coming in slightly lower than anticipated, saving us almost $1,000 there. On the student services, there's no change in moving stipends that would be brought in from the grants. Our auditorship programs are now looking at savings of around $40,000 over our initial projections. So that's a total reduction of $62,017. Also, if you look at technology, in the original budget, we had $335,853. That number has been revised down to $321,505. Again, a variance of about $14,000. Administrative costs have been slightly reduced, so tuition reimbursement has been reduced to $1,000, and the amount of money in the reserve has actually been pushed up a little bit, $16,605 from our initial estimate. So look at the overall amount of money here, we actually see an increase of $15,605 as those numbers start to come into sharper focus for us. And we take a look at the year-over-year comparisons by some of our major program areas. So at Oris, we're looking at about an $85,000 increase, or 3.13%. The major drivers at Morris are staff-related and step and column movements for our teachers, new textbooks, and drama program that is being moved back into an operating budget that had previously been funded by ESSER that current year. At LMHS, we're looking at an increase over the current year of around $130,000, or 2.32% change. Again, similar story. The majority of that is tied up in teacher salaries and their steps and column movements, but then also rounded out by guest speakers, field trips, and textbooks. Guest speakers and field trips have been removed from the budget during COVID, and so adding those back in increases the cost of budgets. Student services, we're looking at an $80,000 increase, or 3.92%, largely driven by increases in transportation costs, as well as anticipated services. One new support position, and also an accounting transfer. So sometimes in these budgets, we just move a little bit in the accounting that kind of changed the picture for us a little bit. So that was what drove that. Melissa, do you want to just clarify what the accounting transfer is, just so that being transparent for everyone?
Yes, there was a paraprofessional that was being paid out of a general education line item that was performing these services. And we have to report to the state where the work is being done, so it's easier to report to the state when it's in the right line. So we moved it over.
And our other school services, we're looking at an increase of around 25,000. That represents a 16.65% increase. Again, largely tied up in salary step movements. One support position that was moved into 504 services, and then tutoring needs that are coming back from the ESSER grant will be reflected in the operating budget. So that we're trying to mitigate that potential cliff in the future when those ESSER grants fall off. Technology is looking at an increase of around $40,000. It's 14.2%. Largely contractual salary obligations, also curriculum software, and then consultant fees for E-rate consultant, which in some ways almost pays for itself because that E-rate consultant ensures we get the maximum amount of E-rate funds, and so that's a kind of a cost that again is recouped in the revenue that generates. So the overall budget, we're looking at an increase of 696,867 and a percent increase of 4.91 versus the previous 5.46. Other program areas include administration. We see an increase in the administrative costs of $225,000. Some of that is salary, but then also we have curriculum stipend position that we'd like to add to meet the NEASH requirements that require us to go through and do a comprehensive alignment of our curriculum, both across grade levels and so across grade levels horizontally and then across grade levels vertically as well. That was a major finding in the NEASH report. So in order to meet that, we're looking to add a stipend to enable somebody to come in and help us do that curriculum alignment work. Also, an increase in liability insurance, a policy review for the school committee being performed by MASC, and then cost reduced for the new superintendent induction program, and then also increases in our advertising costs. In operations and maintenance, we're looking at an increase of 46,574, largely driven by salary obligations, supplies and substitute costs, HVAC maintenance that would be coming into the budget from the ESSER grants, as well as other services. And then we're looking at the revenue application. This is one that we're seeing a variance and increased cost of almost $66,000. And that's actually a reduction in the amount of money we're taking in through school choice. So during this year, coming out of COVID, we took less school choice students, and so that ended up reducing the amount of revenue that we were able to generate. So that gets reimbursed to us the following year. So next year we get the economic impact of not taking those choice students this particular year. So that's where that comes from. And then benefits look to remain level, and so there's no change there. So again, we were able to go through and take a look at those revised numbers and reduce the budget from the 5.46 that originally proposed to 4.91. This offers a snapshot of how our funding breaks out by program. So LMHS, student services and Morse, and the benefits are the bulk of where we spend our money, followed by operations, maintenance, administration, technology, and services. Schools are very personnel driven. As you can see, most of the costs are driven by personnel. You know, in a typical school district across the country, about 85% of the costs are tied up in staff salaries and benefits. which, again, the guys like Eric Kanushek at Stanford would say represent the instructional core, which is the interaction between students and teachers at the classroom level. And so in a lot of ways, our monies are going directly to the students and to the point of instruction. So there's not a lot of fluff in the budget. We went through and revised the first time through our projections down. We didn't park money in places just because we've always done that. The second pass through, again, we really were able to take the initial numbers and as we got more accurate figures, revise the budget down to under 5%. And so that's where we are at this point. Melissa, did I miss anything that you need to share?
No, I think you did a fine job.
I'll make sure I get it all.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding here. The 78,000 that was reduced on another slide, there was the 15,000 that was added to the reserve. That's all factored into this
Yes.
4.91.
Yes, all of it. Yes, the 78 reduction is the net, including the 15 addition.
Now, are you all set?
Yep.
So,
Stop sharing.
we'll have a discussion about any aspect of the budget we want. Much of what Mark has shown you tonight will also be what we see in 2 weeks when we do the formal budget hearing. And make changes based on what we talked about tonight. And just so you know, when we actually do the budget here, changes can still be made then. What we'll be doing is Melissa will have prepared a motion with a number in it for us to approve. We'll change that number if necessary up or down. But that will be what we will do in 2 weeks.
And are we just approving the overall number or allocations?
We approved the overall number. Allocation changes we make in our discussions now.
All right, and that concludes my report.
So. First of all, I just want to say that I'm pleased, with the work that, Mark and Melissa have done to get this down from 5.46 to 4.91. Those of us on the finance subcommittee, which are Oren, Christine, and myself, had a discussion on January 5th, and I raised concerns about what the budget might look like, knowing that we put things in ESSER last year and that they really belonged in the operating budget, and knowing that we had less school choice revenue coming in. And I had no idea, because that was January 5th, we didn't get the budget presented to us till January 24th or somewhere around there. So it wasn't clear what the number would look like. Came in at 5.46 originally, and now it's down to 4.91, which is where we are.
Mark, can I ask one question about the revisions? It seemed like, I guess about 3/4 of the net reduction is in student services, both the stipend to grant and then the out of district. Is that a re-estimation of costs, or does that represent any change in the program or reduction of services?
It's really a re-estimation of cost. Again, that number fluctuates a lot depending on what students will be serving and what their IEP teams decide. And so again, you try to do your very best to kind of ballpark that initially. Then as some of those data points start to become a little bit more clear, then we're able to really refine that down. Right? And so if we said, hey, like we could have another district cost, somewhere that's going to be 300,000, but then it comes in at 100,000 more, then we clean up that one. So again, we tried to, I think, initially do some rainy day forecasting. We never want to come in under and then be caught short-handed. So I think we kind of try to operate and say, like, let's just say worst case scenario, what we're looking at, and then as those numbers became more clear, we were pleasantly surprised some of those costs were coming down. Again, those could change, at a moment's notice, somebody could enroll tomorrow and that could change.
But we also, one element of the reserve is coverage.
Exactly.
For that.
Yes, right, and that's why we can make sure we have a reserve for that, and then there is a special stabilization fund, should go beyond that as well.
How do you fund for that stabilization fund? You just put a lump sum in every year typically?
So at the end of the year, when you're closing the books, the town does a transfer. Typically, it's at the town meeting, they vote to transfer, I think it's 50,000 a year. I could have that, it could be a little bit higher, I think it's 50. So the maximum that it was set at is 250, and that's where we're at now. So we have not funded last year, we did not fund, and this year we won't fund unless it's utilized.
Yeah, we funded it right up to the limit of what we're allowed to put in, this is percentage figure to develop somehow. And we're funded right on that stabilization fund, we're funded right to the top.
So how does that play into the student services line item?
It doesn't, what it will help us with is if there's an unexpected cost that occurs. Could be a placement, could be services, but we would have to go to the town and enact requesting that money.
Oh,
But
I see.
that's
So we
not
don't
part of the
so we
envelope.
don't typically pay out of the stabilization fund.
No,
No, it sits in case we need it.
Okay.
we have some money built into the reserve
Yeah.
to try to cover what might be anticipated or unanticipated, but this goes beyond. We have, we already have
I got
reserve.
it. Thank you.
Can I make just a comment? I see in a lot of the notes areas, reference to contractual salary obligations. There are a lot of pieces in here that seem to be things that are non-discretionary. And so it would be, helpful when I look at the 696, 867, when I look at that and I try to remember the individual the individual presentations, it's difficult for me to look at that number, look at all the salary changes and say, okay, what percentage of that, or what's the hard 696? What's the hard number that makes up that number? Same with additional personnel, same with, increase, same with the number, the aggregate number that had gone to Estra and come back. Because the way, in a simplistic way, the way I would look at it is, this is our increase, and I would go bing, 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 down. This is the salary. This is the increased personnel. This is the increased transportation. This is what we got, what had been in Estra, and then we're left with whatever. It's kind of discretionary. And I think that I don't get a sense of what that is. And I'm not saying it's a black box.
Yeah,
It's
so
just
at
hard to-
LMHS, the next slide, the field trips are 45,000. The speakers are about 15,000. Textbooks are 9,000. Sorry, textbooks are. Yeah. And then the column of movement, I don't see in my notes here, most we have to get back to that. Software is 8,000 each. And in Morris, so this special, so then special education services that were added also at one para, transferred in one from Morris. And that's a cost of 71,000. Supplies and texts, about $5,000. That used to be from the grant that we coming back into the operation budget. Undistrict transport is 35,000. Tuition, looking at about 58,000. Going to other school services, tutoring is 3,000, professional development is 1,000. The support position, 16,000. And technology and software would be 23,000, and E-rate coming in at 7,000. So that, and again, we can send you those costs again. Take another look at them. That gives you kind of an idea of where those come from and how much of that is tied up in, you know, some of the step.
And it's not even so much the details, it's just, you know, we're seeing a big part of this increase is salary, so it's a line item. As it pertains to the entire increase. And these are all of our, these are aggregate increase in transportation, aggregate increase in supplies. It just, it helps me kind of. Sure.
As the crosswalk, if it's updated too, with these changes. So if we looked at the crosswalk, we could see what the total
Yeah.
salaries.
Yeah, the crosswalk is the line by line, and you can see the
Yeah.
total, but that's, what you're asking for is easy for me to do from the spreadsheet. And I can just total each program area, salaries, just like you said, transportation, supplies and services, things like that, so that you can see exactly where it
Well,
is.
yeah, and I'm looking at it in an overview.
Right,
Yeah.
not even by program area, you just want the 696, what is it comprised of?
Yeah, and we know that a certain amount of it is money that came back from the ESSER grant.
Yeah.
Whatever that number is.
Yeah, can I make an observation about that? Because I think, David, I think the way you sort of described it, that's exactly how I was trying to wrap my head around it also. And when I went back and looked at last year's budget and where the committee made reductions to get to 3%, the committee did two main things. One, swept in $136,000 or swept out $136,000 to ESSER. And two, took credit for a lot of temporary cuts. So we basically wiped out textbook spending, stipends, and field trips, none of which were actually sustainable cuts. And so the other big jump that's coming back in this year is all of those things coming back in. If you count the $136,000 of ESSER, and then there's about $100,000 of that field trip stipends, textbooks coming back in, you get, it's almost $250,000 of headwinds that our budget is facing. And so one thing I want to do is actually acknowledge, as I did do it, acknowledge Mark and Melissa's work. This is actually an incredibly tight budget, because if you put that $250,000 to the side, it's right at 3%. The problem is that this committee last year, faced with an actual large increase, rather than make sustainable cuts, hid $250,000. And now here it is again. And so if we adopt this budget as it is proposed, we're basically giving ourselves a free pass for what we did last year. It's too late to go back and look at what was the growth we should have looked at harder last year. But the reason that we're at 5% instead of 3% this year is that we allowed an extra $250,000 in last year that is now creating that pressure. And you know, in a sense, to have told the town last year that we were in fact coming down to 3%, and then turning around and saying, well, we have to be at 5% this year, is a slightly sophisticated way of having just done the 5% increase last year and being back at 3% this year, which I certainly have very serious concerns about. And I guess the last thing I would just emphasize in kind of how we think about this is just $250,000 is a lot of money. I mean, when we're talking about, you know, 3.1 versus 4.9, you know, this is a little broad brush, but in general, we're not really adding a lot to the school for this coming year. We're basically trying to maintain services from last year. If we were actually able to hold our core growth to 3%, we could have a great discussion about what we could get for 5%. I mean, we could go out to 3 pre-K sections, provide free pre-K to everybody in the town. We could give Morris and LMHS, the extra $100,000 to do the kinds of things that, they might love to do that they don't have that option. That's the payoff for holding the core where it needs to be, is that then we can go out and say, look, we want to spend some extra money this year, and here are the really great additions we're making to the school system by doing that. And part of my frustration is that when we don't do that, we instead end up having to basically just try to sort of tread water. And so I think that's, if nothing else, I think that's a real reason to hold ourselves to getting things under control in the core budget, so that we can then actually talk about the kinds of improvements we think we might want.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit confused. We've been trying without adding programs over the last several years. I don't know what the last time we added a program was, to operate a level services budget, which, last year we were told we had to cut $175,000 or whatever to get it to 3%. Which we did by, as you said, moving things into ESSER. We put by cutting some areas that, because of COVID, we weren't really expecting to use, all of which now has to come back in to create the level services budget that we, and the 3% figure, in my opinion, becomes an unrealistic target. It's a placeholder that the town manager puts in for all the departments. But it's, and many years we've held to that or less. And every so often you get to that point where, without cutting programs, if you want to stay in a level services budget, it's got to, the cost is going to go up. How much it goes up is the thing. So you're suggesting that there may be a point where if we held at 3%, that we might be able to look and say, okay, well, what are some things we could do with that extra 2% that we don't have? But, I guess my argument would be that just to stay level, we can't do it at 3%, that year after year. We can do it, we can do it many years, but at some point, it has to go higher just because of, our labor intensive budget. I don't know if that made any sense or not, but.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I would disagree that the steady state that we should have to go higher. We should be able to deliver a level services budget within 3%, I would think. At least, prior to this year, that's been generously above cost of living increase. It is above the salary increases that are built into the LEA contracts. And as you said, we've typically historically been able to. I would love to understand better why last year we couldn't, especially my understanding is we had a lot of retirements last year, which should have been another huge tailwind that should have really helped us keep the budget down. So I don't know. Those of you who were on the committee last year might be able to speak better to this. What were those pressures driving the budget higher last year? But it's not clear to me what structurally in the way we run the schools requires cost to go up by more than 3% a year to achieve a level service budget.
Well, right off the bat, with the obligations, the contractual obligations we have to the 3 units that we have, I can't tell you the percentage. Melissa can tell you right off the bat, our budget would go up. Going up $696,000 as opposed to what amount would it be Yeah, off the top of your head, obviously you don't have the exact number, probably.
It would be close to a 2%. It's like 1.9% increase just for, step. And
With
Whatever column
no,
it's in.
yeah, with no additional, just with the steps, it's, slightly less than 2%. And so then anything else gets built off of that. The portion of the budget that is non-salary is what keeps getting compressed. I mean, obviously, we have things like the busing contract that, there are various things that we can't. And I think that we probably will be spending more for heating and stuff now that we've gone to a different, we were tightening everything up and then we had to open things up, last year to get more airflow in buildings and so on. So there are a number of things like that that at best we can maybe hold even or the bus contract was up, whatever it was, percentage was, but so the portion of the budget that's not salary has been either staying what it is, it's not been growing, it's been tightening up. So I don't have a clue what our actual percentage of our budget is for salaries, but it's probably gone from 80 to 83 or 4 by now. Get a real number in that, something,
about
but
84,
I'm sorry,
84.
it's about 84. And I know what you're saying about retirements. We had 8 or 9 retirements last year, and we did save some money in retiring, but when someone retires at 90,000, let's say, there's going to be health benefits that follow them, or retiree health benefits. And when we hire somebody new, we may hire them at 45, or we may hire them at 60, depending on, Melissa builds in a number between 50 and 60, I think, to anticipate some flexibility for the hiring process. So we are saving money, but it's not the mammoth amount of money that you think on the face of it, 9 people retiring at 30, saving maybe 20 to 30 grand per hire, that would be a big part of the goal. It doesn't actually work that way when the hiring takes place.
No. And you may get some that are new teachers coming in or middle of the scale teachers that have been at it for a few years, but you also, depending on the subject matter, may get one that is right back at the 90, that comes in at the high rate.
Well, I mean, that is a choice for the administration to make. If the only way the budget is sustainable in the context of the contract schedule is if senior teachers as they retire are replaced by junior teachers who are earning less. I guess my other question, I don't know the data on this, but my sense is that the district's headcount has risen over time, which is certainly, at least, which is a part of that increase that you're describing, the percent that goes to salary.
Yeah, I don't know what that number is. It's stayed pretty constant in the years that I've been, in the budget. The number of professional staff has stayed around 94 or 5 of the people who are on the contract. I don't know.
All employees, and there's 164, that includes part-time, all employees.
And what do you have a sense of what it would have been 5 or 10 years ago?
No, since I've been here, there's only been 3 additional in my time here.
I'm going to see if I can find that later. I'm sorry?
Are you looking for the number of employees we had 5 years ago?
Do you have that readily available?
I do.
Oh, there you go.
Not readily, but soonish. I said not instantly, but soon.
Well, as a,
So
just a,
131, like 15, 16.
Further back, how far back do you go?
11, 12.
Sure.
Were some additions somewhere around 12, 13, 14, when they went to the 8-period schedule.
Or what's that?
There were some additions at the high school, they went to the 8-period schedule, I don't know precisely what those were. And there were some changes made when Kim Lee was principal at Morris, in terms of adding the math and reading coaches. But I think there was some personnel that also left, I mean, probably some increases then. So probably over, I'm thinking that maybe over a decade, maybe it's gone up 5 people, but again, those are just, that's just winging it.
So the 12, 13 is the aspect of the year I have with that, and there was 162 employees,
62?
162 in 12, 13. I keep going to the bottom.
No, so that's.
No, what do you say is
It's about
164.
164, so it's been pretty stable, it has gone up, it's been pretty stable. What else?
Question, on a different topic about, marketing in your presentation, so the curricular stipend, which I think is coming in the administrative budget. I think I've heard it said before that, many other districts would employ a curriculum director or some sort of comparable position who would have, well, I assume it's similar responsibility. And Lenox Public School not having that position, sounds like this is the solution that we're gonna pursue. But I'm just curious if that's a true statement. You know, how you think about like kind of the trade-offs there, I guess, cost benefit analysis in terms of what we're getting. To me, and maybe you can explain a little bit more about this too, but the stipend sounds like it's gonna be some additional funding for one of our employees, I would assume, to do this work instead of adding headcount and a dedicated person, which would presumably cost more, but, you know, maybe give us more bandwidth. You know, so those are kind of the questions I was thinking through.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. That's probably in my initial analysis of district, one of the areas that really struck me as a area of need or growth was the ability to do curricular work and or to have a coordinated program for professional learning. Typically, there is a curriculum department and a curriculum director that helps work with that. In addition to our size, we don't need a department per se, but at least a dedicated curriculum director would be great, or coordinator who would work with a team of teachers and or administrators to do a couple of things. One, the curricular alignment that has to be done under ES. And then the thing is, as soon as you finish that, no one's gonna start all over again. It's an ongoing cyclical type of cycle. Second part is getting on a consistent adoption and review of curriculum. And so again, you should look at all of your courses, phase this into years, and say every so many years, we're going to roll these curriculum review cycles. Make sure that our curriculum is up to date, that it's curriculum that's aligned to the standards, and that it's had adequate resources and or resources that need to be replaced or refreshed, that we have a way to do that. That includes going out and getting requests for proposals, having vendors come in and present these things, having the stakeholders study this. So it's a lot of work. And then also then thinking about the software packages and subscriptions that will support that kind of thing. Again, our technology department is good at the implementation side of that, but they're really not educated by trade, so they wouldn't know, the best, science software to support, inquiry learning. So that's where a curriculum director would really, I think, help that. So It's certainly on my wish list, but in order to try to, save pennies in the budget, one of the ways we kind of split the baby was to say, well, let's at least do a stipend, so that we can get the work going, so we can get our accreditation. We don't want to be unaccredited. And so, but again, I think that the need is going to still be there. And to your point, it is going to be a pain point in terms of trying to add yet one more thing to someone else. Anyone who understands our district and has any knowledge of any other districts can see how we're a very flat organization. And so folks wear many hats, do a tremendous job, but it's hard. And people are stretched. It's only so many hours in a day. And so that would free up, like you said, bandwidth to be able to do that work, grow our academic programs and continue to be on the leading edge of curricular innovation. But that's, again, one of the things that in my perfect world, we would be in a full position there in our stipend.
One of the, what was the number that you had up there for benefits?
3.260 million.
3.2. If you go back, I don't have the information broken down for the years in between, but if you go back to 2015, it was 2.357 million, 2,357,000 for benefits. So a big driver of our budget over the years has been the fact that those benefits have gone up, in the last 6 or 7 years, they've gone up $900,000, and that's forced the rest of the budget to be tighter. And fortunately for us, there've been some years when there was no increase in them, but you can see just from the 2.357 to the 3.2, whatever it is right now, and that's over a 3, 6, 7 year period, 7 or 8 year period. It used to be that our budget was looked at, the benefits were kept aside because there wasn't a lot of control of those unless you just didn't hire a lot of people. But now it's all worked into the whole picture, and it's made it, because that's part of the 3%, it really tightens up what you can do.
Well, I mean,
I'm glad you brought that up. I see that as cutting exactly the other direction. I mean, the benefits is, close to a quarter of our budget, and it's not going up, right? It's at 0, and yet we're still at 4.9 overall. If you take the benefits out and look at what's happening to the part of the budget that we do control, it's up much more. It's is that right? Yeah, it's up 6.4%. And so from a sustainability perspective, that also raises another big question, which is what are we going to do when benefits start going up again?
Well, did this figure include the potential increase this year in benefits?
No, it's held level from last year. There's a premium holiday scheduled, so it will be level as far as the budget is concerned. But what you see in the benefit end is as people retire, we had 8 last year, they move on to be a retiree status, but still receive benefits. So you'll always have, you take my position, for example, the person before me is receiving benefits, I'm receiving benefits. So that will add into it, even though there's not a premium increase. If you have a lot of retirements and full replacements, you'll see an increase. Now,
but we're not right now.
we're not right now because I've gone through all of the retirees and employees and knocked off anybody that shouldn't be there. So that's why we're not seeing an increase.
Right.
If
So
I had not
no, that's
cleaned that up, we would be.
that's terrific. But my point is that if we expect in the long run, if we're concerned, we can't be in the habit of 6% increases in the core budget that takes credit for no increase in the benefits to soften the blow, because someday that benefits piece is going to be 3%, 4%, to your numbers, Bob, historically it's been even higher. And what our overall budget growth is going to look like if benefits starts going up again, it's gonna be much worse. I mean, that's a big benefit that we're getting as we're trying to do this year's budget. And I think again, should sort of be cause for concern. I mean, I don't have some other budget I'm about to plug in my pocket that shows how we stay below 3% and then, cut for, save even more money from there. But I'm hoping that the committee will take to heart the need to work on this. I mean, it's not clear to me exactly by what process we ultimately decided to come down to 3% last year, but this budget just reverses that.
Well, the process was, we were told, get it to 3%.
Yeah, it was a year of, global pandemic, and there was a lot of concern that the town was gonna go bust because of the impact of the COVID pandemic. So we worked pretty hard to accommodate their need, because everybody was nervous, I mean, seems like a long time ago now, but it really wasn't that long ago when people were panicked.
I mean, the chairman of the board of selectmen came and said, no, not 3.7, not 3.75, 3, get it to 3. And so we did by moving the stuff around, because we had the ability to. In a year when we didn't have ESSER funds, we would have cut several staff members. And I believe, I don't know precisely, if we go lower than 4.91, if we went to 4.25, or we went to 4, we would be we'd start to cut personnel and or programs. Because we're at a point now where there's no more give. If we were gonna cut 5,000, maybe not. But if we're gonna cut anything significant, if that's what the committee wants, then it will be personnel.
The 6% core, what are you considering making up that core? You talking about 6%?
Just subtracting out the 3.26 benefits,
Okay, all right,
because that's,
yeah, okay.
and so then we're going from 10.9 to
But
11.6.
part of that 6% though is the reduction in the revenue that can be applied.
Yep.
So last year it was 1.9 that was applied. This year it's 1.7. There's a big portion of it. If we don't have the revenue, we can't offset it. But before the revenue was applied, it was actually only 4.93. So that 6.6 percentage points is because of the reduction in revenue that we have available to us.
Yep, no, that's definitely a headwind that we're facing as opposed to the tailwind. I mean, the point that if part of what we're saying is, look, we essentially made temporary cuts last year because we were worried, and now we're not worried, so we're putting it back. And that's why increase is much higher. That's a rationale. I think I guess the thing that I'd like to see and that I asked about last time, and then also in the finance subcommittee, is I take Bob's point that the next thing that would have to happen would be a personnel cut. I think this committee should be interested in and want to understand what that would look like. What is it that we're preserving at 5% versus 3%? What is it that is going to be at risk next year if benefits is going up 4%? I think we should think about that and want to understand it, as opposed to what feels to me very much a process of just waiting to see where adding up all the numbers to level service from the last year was, and then saying, well, that's what this year's budget is going to be. Because I feel like we're being quite reactive, as opposed to proactively shaping the budget to align with any long-term priorities.
It's a good finance subcommittee conversation. I think it's gonna be especially relevant if we keep it at 7% inflation. If the CPI stays at 7% during that time, next year is gonna be difficult.
Sure, but well, that's, I mean, this now cuts the other way on the contract. If 85% of our costs are locked in to a contract, we're not, the reason our budget is going up has nothing to do with, at least at this moment, has nothing to do with inflation.
A percent is what, $140,000 in the budget?
Yeah.
So,
147.
you've still got 15% to play with. That's a good chunk of change. It's a good topic for the finance subcommittee to be mulling over.
We'll be meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah, and then Thursday night, Mark and Melissa and I. Town finance meeting. Root out earlier in the day, I'm hoping that. Which is gonna be more
Which is
fun.
gonna be more painful, I guess.
Well, then my last comment is maybe this is a process we want to think about for next year. But I think it would be very constructive to the district's health for us to think about what is the next $1 million of stuff we would spend? And how does that compare to the last $1 million we're spending now? Because right now we're taking for granted that the way that the accumulation of decisions we've made over 20 years represents the best possible allocation of resources. You can imagine we were in some totally different world where we had 3 fewer teachers at LMHS and a free universal pre-K program and something else. And if I were to come in and say, guys, we need to eliminate that free universal pre-K program and put in the 3 LMH teachers, you would think I had 3 heads. And yet that's where we are, just because that's the way it added up. And if we start from that position, we are paralyzed in our ability to actually do anything that has potentially at level cost to improve the overall quality of the program, whether that's at the beginning, whether that's, we have this one pathways pilot, but potentially building out a couple of really strong pathways programs. Whatever that may be, I don't know myself, but I am 100% sure that the accumulation of miscellaneous choices made over the last 5 or 10 years is not the best allocation for the students. And so we need a process that at least takes that into account and begins to bend the curve over time rather than just turning the crank again every year.
That's a fair point. It really is. Zero-based budgeting, I think, is supposed to take care of some of that. But the educational outcomes and how we deliver education, that's definitely worth having a conversation about. Particularly now we have such new experienced staff members.
And it may be worth considering, starting this process, working on this in the finance subcommittee. But get to a budget that the finance subcommittee can recommend to the committee to consider, and working it that way, and developing that over time. I think the other thing that we want to think about also is trying to speed up or set a different, point where we want to start presenting our budget so that we're also not allowing the town just to kind of say, here's 3%, now what you guys want to do about it, but being able to, we give them the placeholder that we say we're gonna need, and that helps, with the overall budget. And I feel like in in some ways, that a lot of this is playing out in the papers as, the town said this and the schools are over here and they're pitting us against one another, where we probably could have worked together hand in glove, to build this in a more cohesive fashion rather than letting, the Berkshire Eagle, pit us against one another.
Well, and this is the point I was trying to make to Bob earlier, that I think that is what we want to do. It is incumbent on us to have a clear case for what additional the town is getting. When we show up and say, sorry, the numbers this year came in at 5%, I think the town is right to say, well, wait a minute, I don't get to go to my boss and say, sorry, my costs came in at 5%. That's not how things work. If we come in and say, we looked at things here, additional priorities, here's the new and better stuff that we think is going to improve the quality of education in this town, it's going to cost more. We are asking you to vote for it because we think it's worth it. I think that's a very different conversation. But that is not what I've seen this committee or the district leading on in recent years, so.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the point I'm getting to, instead of, we're not talking about necessarily 696,000. We're talking about that piece that's left over, that's the net of that we should be talking about. And what is that? And is it, and from what I hear from the discussion, is that, are we using that piece the best way we can be using?
Well, I hear that. To be clear, I'm saying exactly the opposite, which is that I'm talking about the 14.8 million. And that if we start from, okay, well, we have the 14.2 last year, and then we have the next 400, that's just the inevitable increase on the 14.2. So let's really dig in on the 200 after that. I think that leaves us.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I would think about it the other way.
So what's the will of the committee? And obviously, we vote in 2 weeks on some number.
I kind of similarly to what I think Bob was saying, I think Warren is raising a fair point, but to me, what you're suggesting is not, it's a different orientation with regard to the budget, and I think the timeline would have to be approached differently. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think we're almost through this budget cycle. So I don't see how we're gonna make a lot of changes between now and 2 weeks from now. I personally don't think that's actually necessary. But what I would be in favor of is taking this on as a project within the finance subcommittee, and maybe we start talking now about how we think about this differently in fall for next year. Because I think you're saying some things that haven't been said before, to be honest. And yeah, I would.
Well, I think it's a revisioning of what education might look like. And it's hard sometimes for people to see what the education might look like. You're living in the education that we're doing right now. And it's hard to see if your vision were different, how would you reallocate the resources to make that?
I think revisioning, I don't want to sound overly ambitious. I think revisioning education is great. But at least what I have in mind is not, well, what would happen if kids could take half their courses virtually, right? Or, it's much more at the margin. It's thinking about what are the things that we are doing right now that we are getting the least value out of, and what are the things we're not doing that would be the most valuable. And if we have a continuous cycle of identifying a few things that are least valuable and instead investing in the things we think are most valuable, then eventually does that get to a different system? Maybe, or it just gets to a much more efficient and effective system. But it's that sort of continuous renewal that I'm especially interested in. And Christine, to your point, I think you're exactly right. We're not, that's not a process for the next 2 weeks. The one thing I'll reiterate a final time that will just really affect how I'll feel comfortable voting 2 weeks from now is understanding what the margin is from 3% to 4.9% and what we would lose if we, if we were to, if there was someone pounding him saying you must get to 3%, what would that actually mean? And therefore implicitly, what are we asking the town to support by going above that? I think some sense of that still is really good to me.
And our team can certainly get that for you.
The margin to get to 3% is $270,000.
So we think we're done. Budget discussion.
Good discussion, yeah. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot there.
Okay. Moving on, have we had any subcommittee meetings, governance and leadership? Meeting
Also Wednesday.
Wednesday. Human Resources continues our work. Teaching, learning and culture. Chairman is not here, I don't know,
There's a meeting on March 9th.
March 9th. Finance is meeting on Wednesday. The school building committee is meeting next week. Okay. Here we are, 8:30.
When do we talk about the school calendar? Jen? It's coming up soon, right?
Yes, in April.
April?
I will move that we adjourn.
I will second the motion.
Non-debatable, all in favor?
All right.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.